Consider Cannabis is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnoses, or treatment recommendations. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified healthcare provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition.
Well, that's the language of emotions. We learn it. It's the most important language to learn in our lives so that we can navigate life.
It's time to consider cannabis. This is Curtis. Today is the 42nd episode of Consider Cannabis, and today we'll be speaking with Becca Williams. Becca Williams, a board member of the American Academy of Cannabinoid Medicine and one of the only certified emotional liberation teachers in the world. Becca Williams is a yoga therapist, an educator who specializes in cannabis-assisted emotional and trauma recovery, a registered dietitian, nutritionist, and a certified emotional liberation facilitator, and a longtime cannabis advocate and activist.
Becca, thank you so much for joining us today.
Curtis, I just want to say, first and foremost, thank you. Thank you for doing what you do, covering this landscape of cannabis and the people in this space. I so appreciate your ongoing work in educating us all about, the countless aspects of this remarkable plant. And so I just wanted to put that out there first and foremost.
Well, thank you for joining me. It's stuff like what you're doing that I think is really, really important for people to have their minds open to and be exposed to.
Yeah, it's certainly a different way of thinking about cannabis. What I like to say is that it's the third wave of cannabis in how I use it, the intentional approach or the psycho-spiritual, if you will. So the first wave of cannabis is the recreational, right? So whatever that might look like for one to heighten one's creativity, going out and being introspective in the wild, or just, watching a movie or whatever you're doing. And the second wave of cannabis is, of course, medical. And, whatever hurts, then the medicine comes in and helps you. And then the third is the psycho-spiritual. As I say, it's the intentional approach to incorporating cannabis into a protocol, and I like protocols because I'm a clinical nutritionist, into a protocol that helps us move through emotions. The way I like to say it is meeting emotions, meeting them, greeting them so that we can release them. And I am an emotions therapist. I teach people how to heal themselves of difficult emotions and the trauma that underpins them. And I create a consistent, therapeutic setting, Eastern wisdom teachings and Western science, and optionally the judicious use of cannabis in that to help to learn how to direct your mind to gain control of your inner world for now and always. So this is using cannabis in an intentional manner.
And I have to tell you, it's so good. When I was going through reliving all of the memories that started flooding back and wading through those emotional waters just felt really difficult to trudge through. I mean, even as a Christian and having faith in Jesus and trying to go through all of that with that foundation, even still was really, really difficult and very challenging into my identity and where I was getting approval and where I was able to just interact and relate with people. It was just all messed up. And using cannabis to be able to help me slow down the racing thoughts and submit them one by one, as opposed to have them all swirling around in my head, was huge. I do not know how I could have survived without something to help those thoughts slow. And I'll tell you what, lithium, Prozac, all that stuff was just horrible to try to do that with because it just made you feel nothing. Watch your little kids play and you have no joy over it. You're like, I should be really happy right now watching this and playing with them, but I don't feel anything. Cannabis is not like that. You can experience everything and even at a heightened level. Or at least heightened to what I'm used to.
Yeah, so what you're talking about really is moving through the dark night of the soul. It sounds to me like you had front row seat personally doing that work.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you were on those other substances prior?
I was. My psychiatrist at the time wanted me to continue with the Prozac and lithium, even though I was starting to have neurological shakings in my hands and whatnot. His thought was, well, we could give you another drug, but I don't want to do that yet. And I'm like, this isn't good. Like, this can't continue. But that's what he wanted to keep me on. And when I mentioned the idea of using CBD, he was very against it because I had LSD use in my youth. So he was like, stay away from cannabis. But I tell you, it worked wonders.
Yeah, conventional medicine just can't wrap their head around this. It's emergent. And I do sit on the board of the American Academy of Cannabinoid Medicine. It's me and a bunch of doctors, but doctors who are what I might call enlightened around this. But yeah, it's tough to find a practitioner who will step up and support you in doing the work with cannabis. And so oftentimes we see people having to do it by themselves, kind of, going it alone. I'm not a doctor and I'm not a trained, therapist in the Western vein. But I am an emotions expert, if you will. I am a facilitator of emotional liberation, which you were asking about, and I can go there if you'd like me to. But it really is about, as you've mentioned, how do we move through it? Emotions are tethered to trauma. And we know this in Western science, that trauma is stored in the body. It's stored in the tissues of the body, lodged there. And in Eastern teachings, which is a big part of my work, we believe that we have energy blocks. And the question is, how do you bring up and move through the energy blocks? And so it's energy blocks, it's trauma. They are the same thing, East meets West. And the trauma, as I say, the difficult emotions are tethered to the trauma. So the reason why we're feeling anxious or depressed or angry or sad or lonely or whatever that might be is because of the trauma that we carry. So as you so eloquently pointed out, what we need to do is go back in and be with that so that we can be with it and invite it up so that we can release it. And that is really what my work is all about. My mission and vision is to do that in the most efficient and effective way. And what I tell my students and my clients, and when I talk about this, what we do is simple in emotional liberation, but it's not easy, because when you have to do that heavy lifting of going into things that maybe for your entire life you have tried to push away, either with drugs, right? The pharmaceutical drugs and the numbing, because they do have a place. I mean, they do have a place. If someone is overly anxious and just can't get through their day, to be able to dial that down is very helpful. So you can actually release the emotions so you don't have. But as you bring it up, that it numbs the anxiety, if you will, or dials it down, but it also numbs or dials down the good feelings, the joy, that feeling of love. And so what we do without without those meds, those medications, and people, come to me and we work if they're on SSRIs or, cannabis works well with those, but the idea is to eventually wean themselves off so they can actually start feeling both, the whole full spectrum of emotions. Yeah.
The emotional liberation therapy, you've kind of told us a little overview about what that entails. Deal with those traumas that we've stored up inside. What more is there to emotional liberation therapy?
Yeah, thanks for asking. I think the best way to put it into context is that when we have a serious health issue and we're in pain, physical pain, we want to get out of that pain as soon as possible. So we go to a doctor or a chiropractor or a clinical nutritionist like I am, or some other practitioner to get to the bottom of it. And we want a diagnosis so that we know how to heal it. So your practitioner starts asking you questions and might be doing some diagnostic testing and using tools like that. And we come away with a treatment plan. And it could be surgery or some kind of adjustment or prescription meds or supplements. As a nutritionist, I like supplements. So we know what we need to do when we have some kind of physical challenge in our body, with our body. But when it comes to emotions, and I'm talking about difficult emotions and anxiety or depression or anger or self-doubt or boredom or big stresses, or we feel stuck, how do we deal with these emotions that can have such a devastating impact on our lives? How to deal with them? And when it comes to these difficult emotions, We're in the Neanderthal age, compared to how modern medicine can fix our bodies. And so, how do we fix these feelings that we can't touch? We can't operate on them. Does this sound familiar, Curtis? You're going along and out of left field, somebody says something or does something, or maybe you have just an errant thought come up and you are triggered and you are off to the races.
Happens Saturday.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah. I mean, we can almost all of us can think of a recent time where that happened. And these emotions just move over us and just flood us, like an emotional tsunami. And you don't know what's going on. You just know that it feels awful and you want out now. And you're encountering this overwhelming situation and how quickly the emotions, erupt and they can erase any kind of control that you thought you had. You just feel like you have absolutely no control over the situation. So the way we look at it is it's simply a different form of being injured or sick. It's our brain and our mind health, and it has perplexed us forever. And I just want to say that we have a crisis in our society around this, as you probably well know, people struggling. We hear all about anxiety and depression, but what about anger? People are just really angry. It's all of epidemic proportions. I mean, anxiety alone, we have about 40 million American adults diagnosed with anxiety disorders, and that's those who've actually sought medical attention. So while most of us manage to look just fine, we all have an inner world that's often dark and difficult to navigate, some more than others. And that's where my work comes in. And this method is called emotional liberation. And it involves a number of tools, as I said earlier, embracing that Eastern wisdom traditions and a lot of practices that actually emanate from the Kundalini discipline of yoga, very active and expressive form of movement and breath work. And it's all informed by Western science. As a clinician, I like the science. And then that's where the cannabis comes in. And the tools of meditation and cannabis, what we know right now is that these tools have a very positive effect on parts of the brain. And so I've been pairing my emotions recovery programs with cannabis for years for this reason. And we do it in groups, a consistent therapeutic setting and approach as we do this work. And wow, the outcomes and emotional healing are remarkable.
So much I want to say. People need this all over the place. I mean, like you said, it's an epidemic going around the country and the world, just this fear and anxiety and depression because of these traumas that we've held on to for so long. This is something that's available in Florida. Like, what about for people who are not able to go to Florida and sign up for one of your things? Do you have anything for people like that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I took my whole practice online. Actually, I started doing it about 2 years ago, just in time for COVID. I had moved from Denver, which is a very, as you well know, Colorado being a very liberal state around cannabis, and you can get pretty much everything and anything that you want there. And so I was holding cannabis elevation ceremonies live in Denver and really perfecting the concept of all of this. But I'm online with everything now. And so we have people from Europe and from Asia coming in and join us, Canada as well, of course. Canada's in our backyard, so I never really think twice about including that as something out there, right? It's Canadians and Americans. And yeah, so we do it online. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's fantastic because people need it. And I love that you call them difficult emotions. Because so many people, I mean, I know me, I did for so long. I felt those emotions and labeled them as negative. I looked at them as bad. And it's just so classic human to judge for ourselves what's bad, right? As opposed to just feeling those emotions, allowing those emotions to be what they are, and then moving on from the emotions and not dwelling in them, not letting them control you, and certainly not acting out of them, because that is always getting me in trouble.
Yeah. And what we do is use our emotions as an inner guidance system. So rather than running from them, we want to understand what they're telling us. So in this work, we have a palette of 7 difficult emotions. So for instance, fear and anxiety, it's a family of fear. and its gradations. If you're worried or if you're nervous, that's a form of fear. Fear, anxiety, terror, panic are all categories of fear. And then we have desire, which is usually not considered an emotion, but it very much is. It's a strong emotion. What do we need? And out of that neediness, if we don't know what we need, oftentimes that's why we're addicted to things, because we have a need that needs to be met. It's not being met. We don't know how to meet it. And so we compensate by taking drugs, by drinking alcohol, by shopping, by watching pornography, by being on a screen always all the time.
The scroll.
Right. So it just fills us up so that we don't have to think about this. And so that's a desire. And then we have anger, depression, sadness or grief, guilt, and then self-doubt, a sense of unworthiness, low self-esteem, which we call shame. And shame seems to be a universal issue for most of the people who come to me, a lot or a little. It's just like, I'm not good enough. I don't, those other people are so much better than me. And that's the inner critic all the time, always. So what we do is we work through that and we release it. Oftentimes it helps. Most times it helps. I think categorically among my student population, they like cannabis. They like cannabis as an ally in doing this work. Mm-hmm.
There's something to the way cannabis helps you be in the reality of the trauma and still see good in life. Mm-hmm. Still see that there's potential for good, that there's still life worth living, that there's still experiences to be had that are just going to overwhelm those other experiences. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's not that it's going to make them go away.
Right. On the contrary, it's becoming very present with them. Mm-hmm. But the practices that we do are all about toning the nervous system so that we can begin reorganizing our brain essentially and creating new neural pathways so that we're not defaulting to those difficult emotions all the time. And what I like to say is that we're all walking around with 90-pound weakling nervous systems. So that's the first thing that we do when we start our work is these incredible practices that hail from the Kundalini tradition. It's not the quiet sitting meditations that seems to be so popular today, the mindfulness meditation. And I know from my personal experience, because I too came from a deeply traumatic childhood, I had a lot of pounding thoughts and a lot of dissociation. So to sit down and try to go inward, I tried to do it through Buddhism. I went into it seriously, Curtis. Buddhism, the mystical form of Judaism, Kabbalah, transcendental meditation, and just to sit and I couldn't do it. And I believe that there are many, many people who can't do this and they're totally turned off because of that. And to get yourself to sit down and shut up and go inward in this very busy, fast-paced, distracted society is impossible for a lot of people. And it was impossible for me as much as I tried for years, for decades. It just never clicked for me. So when I encountered this work, that included the Kundalini, oh my God, it blew me away because it is very fast paced, like our society out there. And it just moves through this. So it's a lot of breath work, as I say, it's a lot of movement, particularly a lot of hand and arm movement. We call these hand and finger positions mudras in Hinduism, which is my playground, Hinduism and Sikhism, and sound. And, we know sound in the Christian realm and, any kind of religious or spiritual realm. Sound is always important. Our own sound is said to be most healing to us. So when we do mantras, for instance, Sat Nam, it hits a tone that actually further engages and activates our nervous system and in Hinduism, our energy system to be able to bring up this stuff, these difficult emotions. And so it's very important when you bring in cannabis, it amplifies all of that.
I don't know a lot about Sikhism or Hinduism, to be completely honest with you, but sound waves are very interesting things, and the effects that they can have on people are amazing. So I could imagine that frequencies emitting from inside you would have a extra effect on your internals.
Yeah. So we got it all going on. We got it all going on. We got the movement, we got the sound, we got the breath work, the very expressive and active breath work. It could be, and it just gets everything really stirred up. Now, having said that, I tell everybody, I tell all my students and clients that this is a form of self therapy. And that if something doesn't feel good, because when we start calling up these emotions, Curtis, they start coming up fast and furious. And if we're not used to that, right, because we're so distracted, we try to stay away and keep them at bay. When we start inviting them up, they come up really fast because they want to be seen, they want to be heard. And so in this inner guidance system, they want to guide us. And so the work that we do with them is really a bridge. Our emotions are our bridge to our higher self, that inner knowing, our soul, if you will. And who knew that, right? And for all of these millennia, emotions have just been something that we kind of pushed away. And in spirituality and deep meditation, and all those holy men sitting in caves 2,000-3,000 years ago, just going inward, nobody knew how to speak about the language of emotions. And so this is really very cutting edge. It's revolutionary work. And I think that we're going to be seeing more and more of it going forward, to be able to define those 7 emotions so that when we get that emotional flooding, it's not flooding anymore. It's like, what was that? Oh, that was the anxiety. That was the shame coming up because I felt like somebody was judging me and I was failing the test. And then you get that icky feeling. So to be able to dial in and be with it and know why it's there is imperative to releasing it.
And I think that's probably the gap that I'm trying to bridge, or find the bridge to, in recognizing that I'm triggered, recognizing the reality that I live in, that I'm not in the state that I'm being triggered back into, if that makes sense. And yet being able to walk out the rest of the interactions with the people that I'm around in a healthy way that makes them not think that I'm really pissed off right now. Because once I get triggered, I go silent because I'm so afraid that I'm going to say or do something that's going to make things worse. And then that just makes it worse even in its own way, because it's obvious that I'm mad. Like, I don't even know how to.
It's your inner world and your outer world. And in this work, there are 2 approaches that address those both. One is the thinking mind, or the cognitive, that is using your mind. And as Westerners, we want to understand what's going on. So in emotional liberation, I teach the spectrum of those difficult emotions. I like to do this in groups. It's very powerful when we can discuss our experiences, our challenges, and the behavior patterns that keep blowing up in our faces. It works because someone with their vulnerability in talking in this space talks about how that's bothering them, and everybody else goes, oh my, you too. And it's kind of like this big secret otherwise, right? That, that dark and difficult side of us, nobody can know about that. So when we discuss our experiences, we need this cognitive approach to understand what the emotions are trying to do so that we can help them do it. And then that's where we turn to Western wisdom. India, Tibet, Nepal, they learn to go inward and figure things out. And so that's where we go beyond the thinking mind. So it's an intuitive or meditative approach, right? Where we set the mind aside, ask the brain to be over there, and go into these active and expressive meditation practices. And these practices are, as I pointed out, not your usual meditation. In fact, I often refer to it as the unmeditation meditation. It's heaven sent for those people who can't do the quiet sitting mindfulness approaches. So in this potent facet of emotional liberation, we set aside the mind and all that trying to figure it out, just like you brought up, trying to figure it out stuff that hasn't worked. And you learn to go into the emotion and be in direct conversation with it. And this is the felt experience of awareness, not the thinking mind. And, in this deeply profound exploration, we bring what ails you out of the darkness and into the light so that you can heal it. Yeah, working with emotions is more of an art than a science. And I say that straddling both of them as a clinician and as a yogic therapist. So it's important to have them both, though, because we confirm what's going on with the neurobiology. And that's important to our culture. We need that.
Yeah, so Saturday, last time I was triggered, I had that situation where I could tell people could tell I wasn't happy, but I could also tell that I was triggered by something that was a non-issue, but I was triggered all the same.
Were you in touch with the anger?
I guess I don't even know 100% if I was in touch with the anger. What I know is I felt the anger and I knew I couldn't let the anger out because it was just going to hurt the relationships around me. And that's the exact opposite of what I'm trying to do with my life right now.
Sure.
So I left. I needed to go. It was time for me to leave anyway. But leaving didn't leave my wife feeling good. She started going through the ideas of what I could possibly be mad at her about, even though it had nothing to do with her. But had I tried to talk to her in that moment, I don't even know if I could have communicated to her other than saying what I did, which is, it's not you. I need to just work this out.
So that was a smart strategy, Curtis, to get out of there.
Yeah.
To be able to have presence of mind to say that is one thing,
Okay.
and being able to move out of there and deal with it on your own. But what we do in this work is the practices, and in my work, because we're recovering from being 90-pound weaklings with this nervous system that's just look at me. I'm not in the best shape. I wiggle around or whatever, but man, I have a jacked nervous system. I've been working on it for quite a while. And so what we do is you're in meditation, and I encourage everybody when they come on and work with me, 11 minutes a day. 11 minutes a day. I'm not talking 20 minutes, a half hour, 45 minutes, an hour, 2 hours. I'm talking about 11 minutes a day. But that 11 minutes is non-negotiable. For people who come into my realm, it's really necessary for everybody to do in order to see improvement. And when you do that with cannabis, it's very judicious amounts that we use. And we're all so biochemically individual, as I say, that for one student, maybe CBD is the way to go for now when they're so sensitive. Or someone may want to use a little more THC. What I always start out with in this work is a 2-to-1, twice as much CBD. So having that blend of the CBD, that cannabinoid, and the THC, that cannabinoid, along with the terpenes and the other cannabinoids, but those are the two that we know and talk about, it really balances it out, because the CBD actually, and this is research, this is grounded research, that it relaxes the fight or flight response. So it allows us to be relaxed, more spacious, so that we can open to what's coming up. And then while we're doing it, the THC and CBD, it shows, promotes neuroplasticity. That is the flexibility in the changing of the brain so that we actually can create new neural pathways. So while meditation does that as well, when we're including the cannabis, oh my gosh, it's 2 for the price of 1.
I'm sorry, this is the first time I'm hearing about Kundalini. So it sounds like yoga, but maybe cardio yoga, like faster. Am I getting that right, or am I off?
So let me say, Curtis, that yoga, in the Eastern definition of it, yoga, and I think it's in Sanskrit, means yoke. And that is the connection, the union between the mind, body, and soul. And so there's all sorts of yoga. In the Western mind, we consider yoga kind of form and flow on a mat, right? And that's why it can turn so many people off, because meditation, breath work, is a form of yoga. Being out every day, there's like 22 different kinds of yoga. Being of service is a form of yoga. So there's many kinds of yoga. And the way I describe Kundalini is, well, you can do form and flow on the mat. What we bring to the fore in emotional liberation is more of those very expressive and activating upper body breath work, movement, sound. Mhm.
Okay. It's fascinating. I was really enjoying Tai Chi and Qigong. That really helped me through all this as well. I
Ah,
just happened to be coming into my life around the same time as everything. And I love the movement because absolutely meditating, just sitting still and not doing anything is really hard. After an hour of doing some Tai Chi and Qigong, I can sit. My
mhm.
arms are tired, my legs are tired.
Yeah.
I could sit and be still and enter into that place without the difficulties of just doing it, just going right into sitting and being still. I don't know how anyone can do that even now. I don't know.
Right. I agree. I agree.
Have you ever had a client or someone you were helping who didn't want to use cannabis while going through emotional liberation therapy?
Yes. Emotional liberation therapy is revolutionarily new by about 6 or 7 years. And my dear friend, GM Khalsa, is the developer and creator of emotional liberation. He is a 40-year Kundalini master. Although he's a skinny white guy in LA, but he's quite wise and determined over the course of these years that the difficult emotions are here for us to help us. Um, and and so that sounded really good to me when I met GM Khalsa, because I had turned up a lot of rocks looking for answers to my anxiety and depression. I had anger, that would come up, like you've suggested, just come up and just, I would be a bull in a china closet. So I went into this and started studying with him. But cannabis has been an enduring part of my life, most of my life since college. And I always used it self medicating from the anxiety. But the fact of the matter was and is that self medicating with cannabis, I find, quells the anxiety. Let's use anxiety as an example while you're under the influence of cannabis. But when you're no longer under the influence, it comes raging back. It's palliative, and then it's transitory. It just moves through when the influence is not there anymore. So that was my issue. And then when I encountered this work and started doing it, I started including small amounts of cannabis. And I told Jam that, he said to me, Becca, you can do whatever you want with this work, when he credentialed me in it. But for me, my work and my skills are around emotional liberation without any outside substances. Well, as a clinician, I sent him research, and, people can jump to conclusions. He doesn't jump to conclusions. He's very open minded, but I was able to show him the research that showed why I was using it and incorporating it. He wanted to know more, and he was good with it for my work. So when I was in the first year of this training and I was doing little bits of it and finding that I was healing exponentially, it felt that I was really moving through this work a lot faster. And so I thought, oh, wow, the beautiful part about cannabis, because people come to me a lot and go, well, I try to do cannabis with meditation, doesn't work for me. Cannabis is a very malleable plant, a very malleable medicine, and she works well with frameworks. And so by putting her in this framework of emotional liberation, she just supports, she's an adaptogen. She helps you with what you need help with. And so it was just a game changer when I realized how helpful the cannabis was. But it was really very small amounts. And to this day, I advise people that when they're doing it, it's start low, go slow, and stay low until you know better. And in Denver, when I was doing this work out there, people are smoking left and right or taking cannabis, tinctures and gummies or whatever. And so they have high tolerance. And so that they come in and they feel like they need to do that. But we're working with the plant in a totally different modality. And so it's now in no way, shape, or form can you compare using it within this modality and just recreationally using it, or medically, for physical ailments. So that's something that was a challenge that I needed to work through with people who were used to using cannabis in very high amounts. And also, there's a way to reset your tolerance with cannabis, thanks to Dr. Dustin Sulak of Healer, who has put out that protocol that I use to bring people to be able to lower their tolerance. So they need very, very little. They need a fraction of what they were using before to get the same effect.
Yeah, I like healer.com. A lot of great information on his website.
Yes, Dustin Sulak. And stay low, or as Dustin says, don't be afraid to go all the way. But you need to know, you need to create a baseline for yourself. And I think you asked in passing if there are those who come to me and don't want to use the cannabis. Yes, there has been. And, there's countless people around the world who practice Kundalini and get huge results from it without any substances at all. But, sticking my toe in the water, I'm in the realm of the Kundalini yoga community, although I'm sort of an outlier in what I do. And there's a lot of people who need that piece with the cannabis, something to just amplify so that they can gather themselves and move through. The vast majority of my students and clients prefer to incorporate cannabis in one way, shape, or form, even if it's supplementing. And of course, supplements are a big deal in my orbit as a clinical nutritionist, even to supplement to tone the endocannabinoid system, which is the system that actually receives the chemical molecules of cannabis.
So how do you help someone arrive at the right dose for them?
We do it in the group. I also have orientation videos that we use because I want people to arrive at their own sweet spot. Because this is self-healing, they need to feel into it. And in a culture where we want to just tell me what to do so that I can do it, give me a pill so that I can, this is really foreign for a lot of people, but it's very empowering, Curtis, very empowering to take control of your own destiny. And so I give basics and then we build from there. And if somebody has a question in regard to, well, now I'm ready to come into THC, now that I've been supplementing on a daily basis with CBD, and now I've irrigated and nourished my endocannabinoid system, yeah, I want to try a little bit of THC. And we talk about how sensitive that person may be in their experience. I have people who come to me who just want to right their relationship with cannabis, that they can't do it anymore, or they used to do a lot of cannabis and they can't do it anymore, or they get really upset and anxious when they do cannabis. And really the upset and anxiety that comes with doing cannabis, yes, there can be way too much. I mean, when you see cannabis at 30% or, dabs or whatever, that's not in this model. But if they're using cannabis in an appropriate way, what's happening, and again, this is the art, right? This is the art and the spiritual aspect of cannabis, is that it is allowing the emotions to come up, i.e., if you get anxious when you have cannabis, that anxiety wants to tell you something. So the universe is very elegant in how it pushes you, it nudges you, it pushes up against your growth edge to want you to move on. And when you bring cannabis into that equation, there's a swoosh that you really want to. I've gotten letters. For example, one woman wrote me and said, I want to sit around. This was before COVID. You're in a group and somebody brings out a joint and you're passing a joint or whatever that might be. And she says, when I get high, all I want to do is leave the group and go off and be by myself and cry, or, just be there and go inward. Well, this is exactly what the cannabis is wanting you to do, because you need to be by yourself to do this work. You can't shoot the shit in a group and expect to heal.
Yeah, so true. I don't know what it is, if it's just parents or role models from our youth that told us that we're fine to suck it up, to get up and keep going. But it's like I've been trained to not listen to my body, to not take those warning signs, and to just put my head down and power through, to keep going. And yeah, I mean, there's a reason I feel anxiety. There's a reason I feel pain. There's a reason I feel sad. And putting my head down into this dirt and just keep going and not dealing with it isn't helping anything, and it certainly isn't going to make it so that feeling doesn't come up again later over the same issue, and even worse next time because I didn't deal with it the first time.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And so this work is not for everybody. And that's, what I got wrong at the beginning. I was such an evangelist in, oh my God, everybody needs this. Everybody, no, not everybody. No, there's the vast majority of people are nowhere near wanting to confront their emotions and move through this work. It just hurts too badly. They would much rather stay on a screen. They would much rather continue pornography, drinking, taking drugs, whatever that might be to feel better. But the, dirty little secret is that you never feel better. And so going through this work, oftentimes you're going to feel worse before you feel better. But why not feel worse and just get it over with and move to the other side of it? So in order to get to the other side, you have to go through it. Mm-hmm. And you have to be ready to do that. And you have to have the commitment to do that.
Yeah, it feels a lot like you won't be able to make it through. Like there is no through. It just is that reality. And that's not the case. There is the other side. There is breakthrough and there is healing and there is growth. There is that progress that I was desperate for even before I realized how desperate I was for it.
And you can't do it with the mind. That's why meditation is so powerful. And that's why it's my first line portal in this work. But it's a different kind of meditation. It's the unmeditation meditation, as I say. It's accessible to people who want to get there, who want to do the work, but can't sit like this for years and years and years.
Can you tell us a little more about your master session program?
Yeah, thanks for asking me about my master class course. It's called The Season of Your Awakening, and we break it up into 4 seasons. So it's the it's the spring of your awakening, the summer of your awakening, fall, and winter. And in each one of those, they're 8 weeks long. And during the course of that, in a very consistent therapeutic group setting, we do this work. And each module, we study 2 of the difficult emotions. And since there's 7, we also explore trauma and what trauma is over the course of it. And so a person can either take 8 weeks and study and explore fear and anxiety and self-doubt, or they can go in through for the whole 4-module enchilada, which includes all of the emotions, to learn the language of emotions. The way I put it is like, you're sitting at a table in a restaurant and somebody's speaking French, and you don't really know much about French, but you hear it and you hear this word or that word, and you can't really make it out and you can't converse, but you know that they're speaking French, versus learning the language and hearing the verbs and the adverbs and the nouns and whatever. Well, that's the language of emotions. We learn it. It's the most important language to learn in our lives so that we can navigate life. It helps us navigate life in calm, centered clarity. While there's clinical research going on, there's so much that we don't know, and people don't do this in a controlled laboratory setting most of the time. And so for me, it was my clinician aspect that came in, but doing these elevation ceremonies that I did with Cannabis in this work in Denver on the ground in live, really proof of concept through 3 or 4 years of doing this. And I would always follow up with people and get their reaction. Started collecting a following around that. To this day, I have a small but very loyal following that is growing. It was through the experiential lived process that we learned about these things. And I can't do it. I have to thank the hundreds of people who have crossed my path and been with me in this work, because each and every one of them, I asked for their field report so we can compare and contrast how much we use and what did we do then and when. And to this day, I have an ongoing event that people seem to really enjoy. It's once a month. It's called Advanced Techniques to Strengthen Your Mind, Brain, and Nervous System. And I always follow that up and asking people what their experiences was like. And they come back and they say, thus and such, and I did this much. And, they give me the field report so that we know.
Well, Becca, thank you so much for joining us. Can you tell us where we can find you?
Yeah, easy peasy, Curtis. It's simply myname.org, BeccaWilliams.org. and everything you need is there. You can learn about the master courses. You can learn about my ongoing events. Yeah, I have some quizzes there. What's your cannabis personality? How does cannabis fit into your personal world? A lot of people like that. Yeah, it's just, my way of easing people into the idea of conscious or intentional cannabis. The reason why we're here, each and every one of us as human beings, is to learn how to surf the waves of uncertainty with grace and perseverance. And when we can do that, it's really easy living. That's the promise of my work. You can't just do a drive-by with this work, but if you come committed, intending to put your all into it, you can surf with increasing optimal grace and perseverance.
Consider Cannabis is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnoses, or treatment recommendations. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified healthcare provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. If you would like to be a guest and share how cannabis has impacted your health and wellness, send an email to considercannabisnow@gmail.com. If you have found anything of value on this show, please share it with someone else. Remember to subscribe for free and get every new episode delivered right to your phone. Thank you for listening. Join us next time as we consider cannabis together.